Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Whispers of Time. Today's story is not just about a man, but about courage, leadership, and the power of moral strength. We will explore the extraordinary life of Abraham Lincoln, a man born in poverty who rose to lead a divided nation through its darkest hour. As you listen, you will improve your English, learn powerful new words, and discover how determination and integrity can change history. Let's begin. Abraham Lincoln was not born into power, wealth, or comfort. Instead, he came into the world under the harshest conditions imaginable, in a small log cabin on the American frontier. His journey from poverty to the presidency is one of the most powerful life stories in human history. A story of resilience, integrity, learning, and unwavering moral strength. Abraham Lincoln was born on February 12, 1809, in Hardin County, Kentucky, now part of LaRue County. This constant struggle for survival was a simple one-room log cabin built deep in the wilderness. At the time, Kentucky was still a frontier territory filled with forests, wild animals, and constant danger. Lincoln's parents were Thomas Lincoln and Nancy Hanks Lincoln. They were hard-working but poor farmers. Land ownership in early America was unstable, and Thomas Lincoln lost several pieces of land due to unclear property laws. From the very beginning, Lincoln's life was marked by struggle. Abraham's childhood was filled with physical labor. From a very young age, he helped his family clear forests, split firewood, build fences, and work the land. Education was a luxury his family could barely afford. Formal schooling was rare. In total, Lincoln received less than 1 year of formal education throughout his entire childhood. Schools were far away, teachers were scarce, and books were expensive. Yet Lincoln possessed something rare, an intense hunger for knowledge. Whenever he could, he read. He borrowed books from neighbors and walked miles just to return them. Among the few books that deeply influenced him were the Bible, Aesop's Fables, Robinson Crusoe, The Life of George Washington. These books shaped his moral thinking, storytelling ability, and sense of justice. One of the most painful events of Lincoln's early life occurred in 1818, when he was only 9 years old. His mother, Nancy Hanks Lincoln, died from milk sickness, a deadly disease caused by poisoned milk. Her death devastated Abraham. Nancy had been his greatest emotional support and the one who encouraged his love of reading and learning. Her loss left a deep emotional scar that stayed with him for life. Lincoln later said that everything good in him came from his mother. In 1819, Thomas Lincoln remarried Sarah Bush Johnston, a widow with 3 children. Unlike Lincoln's early life, Sarah brought warmth, structure, and kindness into the household. She strongly supported Abraham's education and often defended him when others complained that he read too much instead of working. Lincoln later described her as my angel mother. Her encouragement played a crucial role in shaping his confidence and belief in self-improvement. As Lincoln grew older, he became known for his extraordinary physical strength, towering height, 6 feet 4 inches, and honesty. Neighbors trusted him because he was fair, truthful, and reliable. He worked various jobs: farm laborer, store clerk, ferryman, rail, splitter. These experiences brought him into close contact with ordinary people, allowing him to understand their struggles deeply, something that later defined his political leadership. Growing up in Kentucky and Indiana, Lincoln witnessed slavery firsthand. Though he did not yet fully understand its moral and political implications, the image of human beings treated as property stayed with him. One moment that deeply affected him occurred during a trip to New Orleans, where he saw enslaved people chained and sold at auctions. This image haunted him for the rest of his life and planted the seeds of his opposition to slavery. Despite his lack of formal education, Lincoln developed a remarkable ability to think deeply and speak clearly. He practiced writing, storytelling, and logic constantly. He believed that clear thinking led to moral action. He once said, "I do not think much of a man who is not wiser today than he was yesterday." This belief guided his lifelong commitment to learning. By the time Abraham Lincoln reached his early 20s, he had already experienced more hardship and disappointment than many people face in a lifetime. Yet instead of allowing failure to define him, Lincoln transformed every defeat into a lesson, slowly shaping the man who would one day lead a divided nation. In 1830, the Lincoln family moved once again, this time to Illinois. Abraham was 21 years old, tall, strong, and eager to find his own path. Shortly after the move, he made a life-changing decision. He left his family home to live independently. For the first time, Lincoln was fully responsible for his future. He settled in New Salem, Illinois, a small frontier village. There, his honesty, strength, and intelligence quickly made him well known among the locals. Lincoln became a partner in a small general store. He hoped it would provide stability and independence. Unfortunately, the business failed due to poor location and economic conditions. When the store collapsed, Lincoln was left with significant debt, which he referred to as his national debt. Unlike many others who would have walked away, Lincoln took full responsibility and spent many years repaying every cent. This decision strengthened his reputation as Honest Abe. Despite working long hours, Lincoln never stopped studying. He taught himself grammar, mathematics, history, law. At night, he read by candlelight or firelight. He copied passages from books, practiced speeches, and analyzed arguments. His mind became his greatest weapon. He believed education was not about privilege, but discipline and persistence. In 1832, the Black Hawk War broke out between the United States and Native American tribes. Lincoln volunteered for service and was elected captain of his unit, an honor he considered one of the greatest achievements of his early life. Though he never saw direct combat, the experience taught him leadership, responsibility, and the weight of command. That same year, Lincoln ran for the Illinois state legislature. He was young, unknown, and poorly funded. His campaign ended in defeat, yet he did not give up. Instead, he reflected, learned, and prepared himself for the future. Lincoln later said that public life was not about instant success, but long-term growth. One of the most extraordinary achievements of Lincoln's life was becoming a lawyer without attending law school. He studied legal texts independently, borrowed books, and practiced relentlessly. In 1836, after years of self-study, Abraham Lincoln passed the bar exam and became a licensed attorney. He quickly earned respect for his clear logic, fairness, and ability to explain complex ideas simply. In 1834, Lincoln ran for the Illinois state legislature again, and this time he won. This victory marked the true beginning of his political career. As a legislator, he focused on infrastructure development, education, economic growth. He supported building roads, canals, and schools, believing these investments would improve opportunity for ordinary citizens. Behind his growing public success, Lincoln struggled privately. He experienced deep sadness and periods of depression. However, he continued moving forward, driven by duty and purpose. These emotional struggles made him more compassionate and understanding, qualities that later defined his leadership. During this period, Lincoln began forming strong moral beliefs, especially regarding slavery. While cautious in public statements, his personal writings reveal growing opposition to the institution. He believed slavery was morally wrong, but also understood the political dangers of immediate confrontation. His approach was patient, strategic, and rooted in constitutional law. By the late 1830s and early 1840s, Abraham Lincoln had firmly established himself as a respected lawyer and a rising political figure in Illinois. He traveled across the state as a circuit lawyer, riding horseback for weeks at a time, handling cases in small towns and rural courthouses. This experience gave him a deep understanding of ordinary Americans, farmers, merchants, laborers, and pioneers, and their daily struggles. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, his words were clear, honest, and grounded in logic. Lincoln's reputation as a lawyer grew steadily. Judges trusted him, juries respected him, and even his opponents admired his integrity. He refused to deceive or manipulate facts for personal gain. If he believed a client was wrong, he often advised them to settle rather than pursue an unjust victory. This moral consistency set him apart in a world where ambition often outweighed principle. At the same time, Lincoln's political ambitions continued to develop. He became a leading member of the Whig Party in Illinois and supported economic modernization, national unity, and constitutional governance. In 1846, his growing influence led to his election to the United States House of Representatives. This marked his first step onto the national political stage. However, his time in Congress proved difficult. The nation was deeply divided over the Mexican-American War and the expansion of slavery into new territories. Lincoln opposed the war, believing it was unjustly provoked, a stance that made him unpopular among many voters. His criticism of President James K. Polk cost him political support, and after a single term, Lincoln chose not to seek re-election. This period was one of disappointment and uncertainty. Many believed Lincoln's political career was over. He returned to Illinois and focused on his law practice, once again fading from the national spotlight. Yet history was quietly preparing him for a far greater role. The issue of slavery refused to remain silent. As the United States expanded westward, the question of whether new states would allow slavery became unavoidable. In 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act was passed, allowing settlers in new territories to vote on whether slavery would be permitted. This law effectively overturned previous compromises that had limited the spread of slavery. For Lincoln, this was a turning point. He saw the act as a moral and constitutional betrayal. Though he had long opposed slavery, he had remained cautious and measured in public. Now, he could no longer stay silent. The expansion of slavery threatened the very foundation of American democracy, the belief that all men were entitled to liberty. Lincoln returned to politics with renewed purpose. He began delivering powerful speeches across Illinois, carefully arguing that slavery was wrong, not only morally, but also politically and economically. He did not call for immediate abolition where slavery already existed, but he firmly opposed its expansion. His words were calm, logical, and deeply persuasive. Lincoln soon became a central figure in the newly formed Republican Party, which united those who opposed the spread of slavery. His reputation grew rapidly, especially after his debates with Senator Stephen A. Douglas in 1858. The Lincoln-Douglas debates became legendary. Before massive crowds, the two men argued passionately about slavery, democracy, and the future of the nation. Douglas supported popular sovereignty, letting states decide the issue themselves, while Lincoln argued that a nation divided between freedom and slavery could not endure. During one of his most famous speeches, Lincoln declared that a house divided against itself cannot stand. These words echoed across the country and defined the moral conflict facing America. Although Lincoln lost the Senate race, he gained something far more valuable: national recognition. Newspapers across the United States published his speeches, and people began to see him as a serious presidential candidate. By the end of the 1850s, the nation stood on the edge of collapse. Tensions between North and South intensified. Violence erupted in Kansas. Trust between states eroded. The question was no longer whether the country would change, but whether it would survive. And slowly, almost unexpectedly, Abraham Lincoln emerged as the man capable of leading it through the coming storm. By 1860, the United States had reached a breaking point. Decades of political compromise had failed to resolve the growing conflict over slavery, and the nation was emotionally, economically, and morally divided. Against this tense backdrop, Abraham Lincoln emerged as the Republican Party's presidential candidate. He was not the most famous or experienced contender, but his calm reasoning, moral clarity, and reputation for honesty made him acceptable to many factions within the party. Lincoln won the presidential election in November 1860 without receiving a single electoral vote from the southern states. His victory sent shockwaves across the country. Southern leaders viewed his election as a direct threat to slavery and their way of life. Even before Lincoln took office, several Southern states began to secede from the Union. When Abraham Lincoln was inaugurated as the 16th President of the United States in March 1861, the nation was already tearing itself apart. In his inaugural address, Lincoln spoke not of vengeance, but of unity. He pleaded with the Southern states to reconsider, emphasizing that the Union was permanent and that violence was unnecessary. Yet his words could not stop the momentum toward war. Only weeks later, Confederate forces fired upon Fort Sumter in South Carolina, marking the beginning of the American Civil War. Lincoln now faced the greatest challenge of his life: preserving the Union. The war tested Lincoln in ways no previous president had experienced. He inherited a divided government, inexperienced generals, and a nation filled with grief and fear. Casualties mounted rapidly, and early Union defeats shook public confidence. Critics attacked Lincoln relentlessly, calling him weak, unqualified, and incapable of leadership. Despite immense pressure, Lincoln remained steady. He worked tirelessly, often sleeping little, personally reviewing military reports and strategies. He learned quickly from failure, replacing generals when necessary, and slowly shaping a more effective war effort. His leadership style was patient but firm, allowing room for dissent while maintaining ultimate authority. As the war dragged on, Lincoln began to understand that preserving the Union could not be separated from the issue of slavery, Enslaved people fled southern plantations and sought refuge with Union forces, forcing the government to confront the reality that slavery was sustaining the Confederate economy. In 1863, Lincoln made one of the most courageous decisions in American history. He issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that enslaved people in Confederate-controlled territories were free. Though it did not immediately end slavery everywhere, the proclamation transformed the war into a moral struggle for human freedom. The decision was risky. Many feared it would alienate border states and intensify opposition. Yet Lincoln believed it was both a military necessity and a moral obligation. The proclamation also allowed formerly enslaved men to join the Union Army, strengthening its forces and changing the character of the war. Later that year, after one of the bloodiest battles in American history, Lincoln traveled to Gettysburg to dedicate a cemetery for fallen soldiers. His speech, now known as the Gettysburg Address, lasted only a few minutes, yet it reshaped the nation's understanding of itself. He spoke of equality, sacrifice, and a new birth of freedom, reminding Americans that democracy required endurance and courage. As the war continued, Lincoln faced deep personal sorrow. He lost his beloved son Willie in 1862, a tragedy that intensified his quiet grief. Still, he carried the weight of the nation forward, driven by duty rather than ambition. By 1864, the war had devastated the country. Entire cities lay in ruins, and public exhaustion grew. Yet Lincoln was re-elected president, a sign that the people trusted his leadership in the darkest hour. With the Union gaining strength and slavery nearing its end, the possibility of peace slowly emerged. Lincoln began planning not revenge, but reconciliation. He envisioned a nation rebuilt with compassion, urging Americans to heal their wounds and move forward together. But history had one final tragic chapter left to write. As the winter of 1865 gave way to spring, the long and devastating Civil War finally neared its end. Union forces, under the command of General Ulysses S. Grant, pressed relentlessly against the remaining Confederate armies. Cities were destroyed, resources exhausted, and hope for the Confederacy faded rapidly. Abraham Lincoln watched these final developments with a mixture of relief and sorrow, fully aware of the enormous cost the nation had paid. In April 1865, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. The war was effectively over. The Union was preserved. Slavery, which had divided the nation for generations, stood on the brink of permanent abolition. For the first time in years, Americans dared to imagine peace. Lincoln's thoughts immediately turned to Reconstruction. He did not seek punishment for the defeated South. Instead, he urged forgiveness and unity. In his second inaugural address, Lincoln spoke words that would define his moral legacy. He called on Americans to act with humility, compassion, and reconciliation, urging them to bind the nation's wounds and care for those who had suffered. At the same time, Lincoln strongly supported the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which would permanently abolish slavery throughout the United States. With his leadership and influence, the amendment passed Congress in early 1865, ensuring that slavery would never again be legal on American soil. Yet peace did not bring safety. On the evening of April 14, 1865, just days after the war's conclusion, Abraham Lincoln attended a play at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. He was in a hopeful mood, believing the nation had survived its greatest trial. During the performance, an assassin entered the presidential box and shot Lincoln. The nation was instantly plunged into shock and grief. Lincoln was carried across the street to a nearby house where he remained through the night. In the early hours of April 15, 1865, Abraham Lincoln died. He was 56 years old. The reaction was overwhelming. Millions mourned the loss of the man who had guided the nation through its darkest hour. His funeral procession traveled across several states, allowing ordinary citizens to pay their final respects. People wept openly, understanding that the country had lost not only a president, but a moral leader. Lincoln's death transformed him into a symbol. He became the embodiment of sacrifice, integrity, and perseverance. His life story, from a poor boy in a log cabin to the leader who preserved the Union and ended slavery, inspired generations across the world. In the years that followed, America struggled to live up to Lincoln's vision. Reconstruction was difficult and often painful. Yet his words continued to guide the nation, reminding Americans that democracy was fragile and required constant care. Today, Abraham Lincoln is remembered not for wealth or privilege, but for character. He believed that leadership meant service, that power required humility, and that justice demanded courage. His legacy lives on in the principles he defended: equality, freedom, and unity. Lincoln once said that the true test of a nation was whether it could endure through its trials without losing its soul. Through his life and sacrifice, he ensured that America did exactly that. Thank you for listening to this incredible life story. Abraham Lincoln's journey reminds us that true greatness is built on honesty, resilience, and compassion. If you enjoyed this story and learned something new in English, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to Whispers of Time, and share this story with others. Through stories like this, learning English becomes a gateway to global knowledge and inspiration. See you in the next story.